let's be real. If you got dropped in the middle of the Sonoran Desert with nothing but a smile and your overpriced water bottle, you would not last long. The sun would roast you like a rotisserie chicken. Your lips would turn into sandpaper, and your biggest hope would be that someone finds your bones before the coyotes do. Yet, for thousands of years, Native Americans didn't just stumble into these same deserts. They built their lives there. They hunted, traveled, raised families, and carried on traditions in landscapes that most outsiders considered unlivable. So, how did they pull it off? First, you need to understand the setting. The deserts of the American Southwest aren't just warm summer getaways, they are places of extremes. The Sonoran Desert, stretching across Arizona and northern Mexico, often hits 110 degrees Fahrenheit in summer. The Mojave Desert, home to Death Valley, has recorded some of the hottest ground temperatures ever measured. Hot enough to fry eggs in seconds and even melt your shoe soles. The Great Basin Desert, farther north across Nevada and Utah, offers a different challenge. Long, dry summers followed by winters that can be bitterly cold. To an untrained eye, these regions look like endless wastelands of sand, cactus, and rock. But to Native Americans, they were structured environments, each with patterns of life that could be studied and mastered. Every canyon, every dry wash, every patch of desert grass carried information if you knew how to read it. Surviving in these deserts began with clothing. Hollywood loves the image of half-naked warriors under the desert sun. In reality, going bare-chested in the Sonoran Desert is a quick path to blisters and dehydration. Covering up was the true survival hack. Native tribes wore long, loose garments made from animal hides, woven fibers, and later, cotton. Loose fabric created a thin cushion of air between skin and cloth. That slowed sweat loss and protected the body from direct exposure. Head coverings mattered just as much. Strips of cloth, animal hides, and sometimes even natural substances like clay or plant oils helped protect the skin long before chemical sunblock was invented. The Navajo, whose homeland covered parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, turned this principle into an art. After the Spanish introduced sheep, they wove wool into blankets so durable they served as insulation by night and sun shields by day, functional protection disguised as beauty. If you tried to live on a 9-to-5 schedule in the desert, you'd be cooked by lunch. Native peoples adapted their days to the rhythm of the land itself. The cool hours of dawn were for hunting, farming, and traveling. Work resumed again at dusk, when temperatures dropped and winds carried some relief. The midday sun, by contrast, was treated with respect. Families rested in shade, told stories, repaired tools, or prepared food. European missionaries and soldiers often misread this as laziness. In truth, it was efficiency. Every ounce of energy saved meant more endurance for the tasks that truly mattered. Moving at the right times also kept sweat loss to a minimum. A single bad decision, marching at noon, hauling heavy loads in full sun, could drain hydration reserves beyond repair. Native communities avoided this trap by aligning activity with the desert's natural schedule. Shade in the desert wasn't decoration, it was strategy. Native Americans treated the landscape like a chessboard, positioning themselves to use every natural advantage. A canyon wall, the mouth of a cave, or even the narrow shadow of a boulder could mean the difference between endurance and collapse. When the land offered nothing, people built their own solutions. Nomadic groups, such as the Apache and Paiute, relied on wickiups. These were domes of brush, branches, and hides that could be raised in hours and abandoned just as quickly. Inside, the temperature dropped just enough to protect against heat exhaustion. On the move, families stretched hides across wooden frames, creating portable canopies that turned bare ground into life-saving shade. For permanent settlements, architecture became its own survival technology. The Pueblo built stone and adobe houses, with walls so thick they absorbed daytime heat and released it slowly at night, keeping interiors remarkably stable. The Hopi, perched high on mesas in northern Arizona, placed their pueblos to catch breezes and deter intruders. From those villages, they practiced dry farming. planting corn, beans, and squash deep enough to capture rare rainfall, so the architecture and agriculture reinforced each other. The Hopi and Zuni added kivas, partially underground ceremonial chambers that doubled as naturally cool refuges. Even the placement of villages was deliberate, perched on mesas to catch air movement, or clustered near canyon walls and water sources that offered protection and comfort. Every wall, roof, and underground chamber was less about comfort and more about outsmarting the desert itself. Water was the true currency of desert life. To settlers, the land seemed bone dry. To Native Americans, it was laced with hidden rivers, springs, and seeps, if you knew where to look. Animal trails often betrayed the way. Deer and antelope did not waste energy wandering aimlessly. Their tracks often led directly to hidden waterholes. Birds circling overhead signaled the same. Even plants told stories. Cottonwoods and willows marked groundwater close to the surface, while patches of reeds whispered of a seep just beneath the sand. This wasn't guesswork, it was an inherited science, passed down through generations. A Navajo herder or Apache scout could walk into a barren valley and read the land like a map. Outsiders often perished within sight of water, while native guides could locate it through signs most Europeans dismissed as background noise. But finding water was only part of the story. Keeping it mattered just as much. Early storage used animal bladders and hides, lightweight and practical containers. Later, Pueblo pottery added an ingenious twist. Porous walls allowed slow evaporation, which cooled the contents slightly and made water more refreshing in the desert heat. For travelers crossing 50 miles of burning desert, cool water wasn't comfort, it was salvation. And in places where rivers could be harnessed, engineering took center stage. The Pima and the Tohono O'odham of southern Arizona built irrigation canals that drew water from the Gila and Salt rivers. These turned dry valleys into farmland where cotton, beans, and corn thrived. Systems sophisticated enough that archaeologists still study them today. When the springs ran dry and the streams shrank to dust, survival shifted to the green reservoirs rooted in the soil. The prickly pear cactus provided both liquid and calories. Once its pads were stripped of spines, they could be sliced open for moisture, while the summer fruit offered sweet bursts of hydration. In the Sonoran Desert, the towering saguaro looked like a giant water tower. But people did not usually drink from its pulp. Instead, they harvested its fruits and seeds, which provided food and drink without harming the plant. Other plants played their part. Agave hearts, baked slowly in earthen pits, produced a fibrous, sweet meal that released both energy and moisture. Mesquite pods could be dried, ground into flour, and turned into food that helped the body retain water for longer. Tubers, bulbs, and wild onions didn't provide much liquid on their own, but eating them released moisture slowly and supported hydration. In the Great Basin, the Paiute treated what settlers called a barren land as a seasonal pantry. Mesquite beans, agave hearts, pine nuts, and wild seeds were gathered and stored with precision. Proof that a so-called wasteland could feed whole communities if you knew where to look. This wasn't improvisation. It was the accumulated science of centuries, taught carefully to each new generation. Settlers, ignorant of these green reservoirs, sometimes died of thirst within sight of plants that could have saved them. For native peoples, plants were more than food. They were lifelines, disguised in thorns, roots, and fibers. Sometimes, hydration didn't come from a stream or cactus at all. It was hidden in food. Desert diets were rich in ingredients that carried water. Roasted agave hearts, ground mesquite flour, and wild seeds all provided hydration as well as calories. Grass seeds, painstakingly gathered by Paiute women, were pounded into mush that retained moisture. Chia seeds, still popular today, were soaked to create a gelatin-like food that released liquids slowly into the body. By eating smartly, desert dwellers stretched every drop of hydration. Foods high in fiber helped trap water within the body, slowing dehydration. The effect was subtle but crucial. Where a careless settler might gulp water and sweat it out within an hour, native families balanced their hydration through the very foods they consumed. To outsiders, this menu looked primitive. To those who relied on it, it was nothing short of a miracle. Every bite was another step away from collapse. Generations of desert life shaped more than knowledge. It molded habits and even the body itself. Children grew up learning to sip sparingly instead of guzzling water. Families rationed their supplies with discipline that settlers often mistook for stinginess. Sweat was conserved not only through clothing and timing, but also through diet: less salt, more fiber, fewer foods that drained the body's reserves. Mental training mattered just as much. Panic wastes energy, clouds judgment, and accelerates dehydration. Calmness preserved both water and strength. Stories of ancestors who endured droughts or crossed impossible stretches of desert reinforced the lesson. Fear was the real enemy. Settlers often collapsed not only from heat, but from despair. Without the confidence that survival was possible, their bodies gave up long before the land did. Native Americans, by contrast, carried centuries of proof in their oral traditions. The desert was harsh, but not unbeatable. Survival wasn't a gamble, it was an inheritance. Moving across the desert was never casual. Journeys required planning as precise as any military campaign. Trails weren't random guesses. They were oral maps, passed from generation to generation, with each landmark serving as a waypoint. A twisted juniper, a solitary boulder, a canyon wall shaped like a face. To outsiders, the desert was uniform. To insiders, it was filled with signposts. The Apache, ranging widely across Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, embodied this mobility. Nomadic and tactically sharp, they read every canyon as both a water map and a battlefield. Outsiders saw emptiness. The Apache saw ambush points, escape routes, and hidden springs. Before the arrival of horses, dogs carried small loads strapped to simple travois frames. After Spanish contact, horses revolutionized travel, but with new challenges. They required huge amounts of water, limiting which routes could be used. Desert groups quickly learned to adjust, calculating whether speed gained by horseback was worth the extra thirst. Timing was everything. Some groups traveled in the cooler seasons, while others planned trips after rainstorms when temporary pools dotted the desert floor. At night, stars became both compass and clock. Constellations guided direction, while the cool air allowed families to cover more ground without collapsing from heat. Every journey was a negotiation between distance, stamina, and available water. Settlers who attempted the same crossings without guidance often underestimated the distances and overestimated their supplies. Native peoples knew better. Precision, not luck, was the real key to endurance. For many desert peoples, survival wasn't only physical, it was spiritual. The desert was alive, filled with spirits that governed water, animals, and plants. Disrespecting them was dangerous. Ceremonies to honor rain, prayers before harvesting, and taboos against waste weren't just symbolic gestures. They were ecological laws disguised as religion. The Hopi rain dances, still performed today, honored clouds, lightning, and the life-giving storms they carried. The Tohono O'odham celebrated the saguaro harvest, with rituals that emphasized restraint and gratitude, ensuring that no one took more than their share. Without weather apps or forecasts, native peoples relied on the desert itself as their meteorologist. Clouds carried messages. Tall thunderheads towering on the horizon signaled monsoon storms. Thin, wispy cirrus streaks warned of changes in the days ahead. Shifts in wind brought subtle temperature drops, or carried the smell of distant rain long before a drop touched the ground. Animals were just as telling. Ants built higher mounds ahead of storms, protecting themselves from flash floods. Birds flew lower before rain. Even plants spoke, blooming out of season to signal unusual weather patterns. Every detail was a warning or an opportunity. This knowledge wasn't scattered superstition. It was a science of observation, refined across generations. Where settlers stumbled blindly into dust storms or collapsed in sudden flash floods, native groups adjusted, moved, or sheltered in advance. The desert rarely surprised them because they had learned to read it like a book. In the desert, food wasn't just fuel, it was water storage in disguise. The agave plant, roasted in earth ovens, became a sweet, fibrous meal that stored liquid within its fibers. Mesquite pods, ground into flour, produced bread that didn't just fill bellies, but also slowed dehydration. Even small seeds and tubers, painstakingly gathered by hand, turned into mushes that stretched hydration hours longer than plain water could. The Paiute, for example, gathered pine nuts from the highlands and stored them for leaner months. The Hopi dry-farmed corn, beans, and squash, crops chosen not only for their nutrition, but also for their ability to retain water within their structure. To a settler, these foods looked meager, but when thirst struck, they were life-saving reservoirs. Eating wasn't separate from drinking. Every bite was part of a hydration strategy. Settlers mocked these diets as primitive, right up until they collapsed from thirst and were saved by the very foods they dismissed. In the desert, bread could be water, and cactus fruit could be a canteen. But survival wasn't only about plants and food. The desert was crawling with creatures that could kill you just as quickly as thirst. Rattlesnakes were the most infamous. Western diamondbacks and Mojave rattlers blended perfectly into the sand and stone. A single strike delivered venom strong enough to kill within hours, if no help was near. Native peoples moved with care, using sticks to prod the ground ahead, and teaching children to listen for the dry buzz of a tail before they ever learned to run. Snakes were feared, but also respected. Among the Hopi and Pueblo, they carried spiritual power tied to rain and lightning. Killing one without reason was avoided. But if it happened, the meat and skin were used so nothing went to waste. At night, the ground came alive with scorpions. The Arizona bark scorpion, no longer than a finger, carried venom that could paralyze. Families shook out bedding every morning, checked moccasins before slipping them on, and raised mats off the ground whenever possible. Firelight around camp helped keep the worst of them away. Then there was the Gila monster, a heavy lizard patterned in black and orange. Slow-moving, but its bite clamped down with venom that caused burning pain and fever. Tribes taught children never to corner or tease it. Respect was survival. Even spiders played their part in desert danger. Tarantulas looked terrifying, though their bites were rarely fatal. Black widows, hiding under rocks or brush piles, carried venom that could leave a settler writhing for days. Native communities simply learned caution: don't reach where you can't see. And then there were predators. Coyotes prowled at the edges of camps, scavenging for scraps, while mountain lions stalked the canyons. People rarely became their first choice of prey, but hunters tracked their movements carefully. A bow, a war club, or later a rifle made sure the balance of fear went both ways. For native peoples, these animals weren't only threats. They were reminders to move carefully, stay alert, and live with respect. Outsiders saw only danger, but desert tribes saw a living system where even venomous creatures had their place. Food, water, shade, and even the dangers of wild animals could keep a body alive. But survival in the desert also demanded a mind strong enough to endure. From childhood, Native Americans were taught that the desert was harsh, but not undefeatable. Panic wasted energy. Fear drained strength. Calmness, patience, and discipline preserved both. Oral stories reinforced these lessons. Tales of ancestors enduring droughts, hunters surviving impossible journeys, or entire communities adapting through lean years. This psychological training mattered as much as any physical technique. A panicked settler might gulp down all his water in an hour, sweat it out, and collapse by noon. A desert-trained youth would sip carefully, rest in shade, and pace themselves until evening. The desert didn't forgive rashness. Those who survived were the ones who treated it with respect, not arrogance. For native peoples, the desert wasn't an enemy. It was a stern teacher. Those who listened learned endurance. Those who didn't often left their bones behind. When European settlers pushed into desert lands, they often arrived with arrogance and little preparation. To them, the desert was an obstacle to conquer, not a place to understand. Many collapsed from heat stroke, poisoned themselves on unfamiliar plants, or wandered in circles searching for non-existent rivers. Horses died of thirst, wagons broke down in dry arroyos, and soldiers fainted in their heavy wool uniforms. For them, the desert was a graveyard. Native Americans, by contrast, moved through the same land with confidence. Guides from Apache, Navajo, or Pima groups often saved expeditions from disaster by pointing out hidden springs or edible plants. What looked like miracles to outsiders was simply centuries of accumulated knowledge. Yet too often, this wisdom was dismissed as superstition or ignored altogether, with deadly results. What was once dismissed as primitive has proven timeless. These strategies were never about clinging to life in a hostile world. They were about creating a sustainable balance with one of the harshest environments on Earth. So, how did Native Americans survive the desert heat without water? By adapting on every possible level, and they mastered it.